The thunder rumbled across the Colorado sky like a warning, but Clara Lawson had never been one to heed nature's cautions. The year was 1872, and the 22-year-old widow was determined to reach Colorado City before nightfall, despite the ominous clouds that had been gathering since noon. Her wagon, loaded with everything she owned in the world, creaked and groaned as she urged her team of horses forward through the increasingly heavy rain. Clara had left behind St. Louis 3 weeks prior, following her husband's death from consumption. Thomas had been a good man, if not a passionate one, and their marriage of convenience had lasted just 2 years before illness claimed him. With no children and no real ties to Missouri, Clara had decided to accept her cousin's invitation to join her in Colorado Territory, where opportunities for a fresh start abounded. "Come on, girls," Clara urged her horses, Penny and Daisy, as the path ahead began to disappear beneath muddy water. The spring storm had unleashed torrents of rain upon the foothills, and what had been a dry creek bed that morning was now a rushing stream cutting directly across her route. Clara hesitated at the edge of the swelling water. Perhaps she should wait it out, but the sky showed no signs of clearing, and night would fall soon. Her cousin wasn't expecting her for another 2 days, so no search party would come looking if she failed to arrive. With a deep breath, she snapped the reins and directed her team into the crossing. The water was deeper than she had anticipated. Within seconds, it rose to the horses' knees, then their bellies. The current pushed against the wagon with unexpected force, and Clara felt the wheels slip on the submerged stones. Panic rose in her throat as the wagon lurched sideways, and one of the wheels caught between rocks. The horses whinnied in distress, struggling against the harness as the water continued to rise. "Whoa, steady now," a deep voice called out. Clara turned to see a man on horseback approaching from the other side of the crossing, riding a powerful chestnut stallion that moved confidently through the rushing water. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the rain, and as he drew closer, she could see that his face was weathered but handsome, with sharp blue eyes that assessed the situation quickly. "Madam, your wagon's caught in the torrent," he called out, maneuvering his horse alongside hers. "This crossing's too dangerous now. You'll reach dry land with me." "I can't abandon my wagon," Clara protested, clutching the reins tighter as if that might somehow stabilize the increasingly precarious situation. "Everything I own is here." The stranger's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I understand, but there won't be anything left if this water rises any higher, including you. We can come back for your belongings once the storm passes." As if to emphasize his point, the wagon shifted again with an ominous creak, tilting further into the surging water. One of Clara's horses screamed in terror as the current pulled at her legs. "What's your name, madam?" the cowboy asked, extending a hand toward her. "Clara," she replied, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Clara Lawson." "I'm Finn Calloway," he said, his steady gaze locking with hers. "And I promise I'll help you recover what can be saved, but right now, we need to get you to safety." Clara glanced back at her wagon, at the trunk containing her husband's letters and her mother's quilt, at the crates of supplies she'd carefully packed for her new life. Then she looked at the rising water that now reached the wagon bed and the frightened horses that might drown if she waited much longer. With a resigned nod, she reached out to take Finn's outstretched hand. His grip was strong and sure as he pulled her from the wagon seat onto his horse. Clara had barely settled behind him when there was a loud crack, and the wagon shifted dramatically as one of the wheels broke free from the axle. "Hold tight," Finn instructed, and Clara wrapped her arms around his waist as he turned his horse toward the bank. She could feel the animal's powerful muscles working beneath them as it fought against the current. For a terrible moment, she thought they too might be swept away, but then the horse found solid footing and climbed steadily up the muddy slope to safety. Once on dry ground, Clara slid from the horse's back and turned to watch as her wagon was claimed by the swollen creek. The horses, still harnessed but now freed from the weight of the broken vehicle, managed to struggle to shore further downstream, where Finn quickly dismounted to secure them. "I'm so sorry about your wagon," he said when he returned to Clara's side. She stood motionless in the rain, watching as parts of her life disappeared beneath the churning water. "Where were you headed?" Finn asked, removing his duster and draping it over her shoulders despite being soaked himself. Colorado City, Clara replied, pulling the coat tighter around her. My cousin Beatrice lives there with her husband. Finn nodded. That's where my ranch is, just outside town. I can take you there once this storm lets up, but for now, we should find shelter. There's an old line shack about a mile from here where we can wait out the worst of it. Clara hesitated, suddenly aware of her situation alone with a stranger in the wilderness, her possessions gone, and completely dependent on his goodwill. As if reading her thoughts, Finn stepped back to give her space. I understand your caution, Mrs. Lawson, he said formally. But I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll be safe with me. We can bring your horses too, of course. There was something in his direct gaze that inspired trust, and Clara had few options. With a small nod, she accepted his help in collecting her team, and soon they were following Finn through the rain toward the promise of shelter. The line shack was little more than a one-room cabin with a small lean-to for horses, but it was dry and provided relief from the relentless downpour. Finn worked efficiently to settle the horses while Clara stood awkwardly in the center of the sparse room, dripping onto the dirt floor and clutching his coat around her shoulders. There should be some dry firewood, Finn said as he entered, removing his hat to reveal thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. And I've got coffee in my saddlebags. Thank you, Mr. Calloway, Clara said formally, suddenly conscious of her soaked dress clinging to her frame. She turned away, using the pretense of examining the small cabin to hide her discomfort. Finn, please, he replied, gathering wood for the small stone fireplace. Mr. Calloway was my father, and he's been gone these past 5 years. As he worked to build a fire, Clara took stock of her rescuer. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to handling himself in difficult situations. His clothes were worn but well kept, and despite his rugged appearance, there was a gentleness to his manner that put her at ease. You're not from around here originally, Clara observed, noting his slight accent. Finn glanced up from the growing flames with a hint of a smile. Boston born and raised, he confirmed. Came west after the war. Never could go back to city life after seeing this country. You fought in the war? Clara asked, moving closer to the warming fire. Union cavalry, he nodded, then changed the subject. What brings you to Colorado territory, Mrs. Lawson? Not many women make that journey alone. Clara hesitated, then decided there was no harm in sharing her story. My husband died 3 months ago. There was nothing keeping me in St. Louis, and my cousin wrote about the opportunities here. I'm sorry for your loss, Finn said, his voice genuine. It takes courage to make a fresh start. Or desperation, Clara replied with a wry smile. And now I've lost everything but the clothes I'm wearing and my horses. Finn added another log to the fire. We'll go back once the water recedes. Some of your things might have washed up downstream. Clara appreciated his optimism but didn't share it. Why were you out in this weather, anyway? She asked. One of my hands reported seeing strays up this way. I was checking the north pasture when the storm hit. He reached into his saddlebag and produced a small pouch of coffee and a battered tin pot. It's not fancy, but it's hot. As the coffee boiled, they fell into conversation about safer topics: the beauty of the territory, the challenges of ranching, the small but growing community in Colorado City. Finn explained that he'd built his ranch from nothing 5 years earlier and now ran nearly 500 head of cattle with the help of 6 ranch hands. It's a good life, he said, handing her a steaming cup. Hard but good. Clara sipped the strong brew gratefully. My cousin's husband owns the general store in town. She wrote that they need help, so at least I'll have employment when I arrive. Beatrice Miller? Finn asked, recognition dawning in his eyes. Clara nodded, surprised. Yes, do you know her? It's a small community, Finn explained. Everyone knows everyone. The Millers are good people. They'll be glad to see you safe. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but the worst of the storm seemed to have passed. The light was fading, however, and Clara realized they would need to spend the night in the cabin. We'll head to town at first light, Finn said, confirming her thoughts. It's only about 3 hours' ride from here. He busied himself arranging what few supplies the cabin contained: a threadbare blanket, some dried meat, and a tin of crackers that had somehow survived previous visitors. Clara watched him work, struck by his consideration. He'd made no assumptions about her, had kept a respectful distance, and treated her with a deference that seemed natural rather than forced. Thank you, she said suddenly, causing him to look up from his task. For pulling me out of that creek. I might have drowned if you hadn't come along. Finn's expression softened. Anyone would have done the same. Perhaps, Clara replied. But it was you who did, and I'm grateful. They shared the simple meal as darkness fell completely, the only light coming from the fire. Conversation flowed easily between them, and Clara found herself laughing for the first time in months at Finn's dry humor and stories of ranch life. When it came time to sleep, Finn insisted she take the cabin's only bunk while he spread his bedroll near the door. I've slept on worse, he assured her when she protested. Lying in the dark, listening to the rain on the roof and Finn's steady breathing across the room, Clara felt a curious sense of peace despite her losses. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, at least, she was safe. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong. Clara awoke to find Finn already outside, tending to the horses. She used the opportunity to attempt to make herself presentable, combing through her tangled hair with her fingers and straightening her still damp clothing as best she could. When Finn returned, he brought good news. The creek's gone down considerably. If you'd like, we can check for your belongings before heading to town. Clara nodded gratefully, and after a brief breakfast of the remaining crackers, they set off. The landscape looked dramatically different in the morning light, verdant and vibrant where yesterday it had been gray and threatening. The creek that had nearly claimed her life had retreated to a more modest flow, though evidence of its fury remained in the debris scattered along its banks. They followed the water's path for nearly a mile before spotting anything familiar. One of her trunks, miraculously intact though water-damaged, wedged between rocks. Finn waded into the creek to retrieve it, and Clara could have embraced him when he carried it to shore. My mother's quilt is in there, she explained as she knelt to open it. And some of my books. The quilt was damp but salvageable, and while the books were waterlogged, they too could be dried. They continued downstream, finding scattered pieces of her belongings: a cooking pot, a framed photograph of her parents, a small box of sewing notions. Each recovery felt like a small victory. The wagon itself was nowhere to be found, likely carried much further by the current or broken apart completely. By mid-morning, they had collected what they could, enough to fill Finn's saddlebags and a makeshift bundle tied to Clara's saddle. It's not everything, Finn acknowledged as they prepared to leave, but it's a start. Clara ran her hand over her mother's quilt, now carefully tied behind her saddle. It's more than I expected. Thank you. They rode side by side toward Colorado City, Clara on one of her horses while Finn led the other. The journey gave her time to appreciate the beauty of the territory: rolling hills covered in spring wildflowers, distant mountains still capped with snow, vast open spaces that made her feel both insignificant and somehow free. How did you end up here? She asked Finn as they rode. You mentioned leaving Boston after the war, but why Colorado? Finn was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. I was at Gettysburg, he said finally. Lost a lot of friends there. After that, cities felt too crowded with ghosts. I needed open sky and room to breathe. Clara understood that feeling, the need to escape memories that clung like shadows. And did you find what you were looking for? Most days, he replied with a small smile. Building something from nothing has a way of focusing the mind on the future instead of the past. As they crested a rise, Colorado City came into view in the valley below, a collection of wooden buildings along a main street, with scattered homesteads and ranches visible in the surrounding countryside. It's smaller than I expected, Clara admitted. But growing, Finn replied. The railroad's coming through next year. Things will change fast after that. They rode into town just before noon, drawing curious glances from the locals. Clara was acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance and the intimacy suggested by arriving with Finn, but she held her head high as they made their way to the general store. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and a plump woman with kind eyes looked up from the counter. Her expression shifted from polite inquiry to shock as she recognized Clara. Clara? Is that really you? Beatrice rushed forward, embracing her cousin tightly before holding her at arm's length to examine her. My goodness, what happened? You weren't expected until tomorrow, and you look like you've been through the wars. There was an accident at the creek crossing, Clara explained, suddenly exhausted now that she had reached her destination. My wagon was swept away. Mr. Calloway saved me. Beatrice turned to Finn with gratitude shining in her eyes. Finn, I can't thank you enough. If anything had happened to Clara. It was fortunate I was riding nearby, Finn replied, removing his hat respectfully. Mrs. Lawson handled herself with remarkable courage. A tall, balding man emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on an apron. Beatrice, what's all that? He stopped when he saw Clara and Finn. Well, hello there. George, this is my cousin Clara, and you know Finn Calloway, Beatrice said. Clara had an accident crossing Willow Creek. She's lost most of her belongings. George Miller stepped forward to shake Finn's hand. We appreciate you looking after our family, Calloway. It was nothing, Finn insisted. Anyone would have done the same. Nevertheless, you must join us for dinner tonight, Beatrice declared. After Clara's had a chance to rest and change into something dry, of course. Clara glanced at Finn, surprised to find herself hoping he would accept. Their brief time together had created a connection she hadn't expected, and the thought of him simply riding away left her with an odd sense of loss. That's kind of you, Mrs. Miller, but I've got matters to attend to at the ranch, Finn replied, and Clara felt a flicker of disappointment. Nonsense, Beatrice insisted. It's the least we can do. We'll expect you at 6 o'clock sharp. Finn's eyes met Clara's, and something in his expression softened. Well, when you put it that way, I'd be honored to join you. After Finn departed to see to his business in town, Beatrice whisked Clara upstairs to the family's living quarters above the store. A hot bath was prepared, and Clara nearly wept at the luxury of washing away the mud and fear of the previous day. You poor dear, Beatrice fussed, laying out a borrowed dress. To lose everything like that. But thank Providence Finn Calloway happened by. He's one of the most respected ranchers in the county, you know. A true gentleman, despite those rough edges. Clara smiled at her cousin's obvious admiration. He was very kind, she agreed, unwilling to share just how deeply his quiet strength had affected her. And handsome too, Beatrice added with a knowing look. Not that you'd be thinking of such things so soon after Thomas, of course. Clara felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Of course not, she replied quickly. I'm only grateful for his assistance. Beatrice didn't look convinced, but thankfully changed the subject to the living arrangements. Clara would stay with them until she found her feet, helping in the store in exchange for room and board. It's not what you planned, I'm sure, Beatrice said apologetically. But it's a start. Clara thought of what Finn had said about the recovered belongings. A start is all anyone needs, she replied. That evening, Clara found herself watching the clock as 6 o'clock approached. She had borrowed one of Beatrice's dresses, a simple blue cotton that had been taken in to fit her slimmer frame, and arranged her hair as neatly as possible with borrowed pins. When the knock came at precisely 6, her heart quickened in a way that both surprised and alarmed her. Finn stood at the door in clean clothing, his hair still damp from washing, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. He looked different in town clothes, no less imposing, but somehow more accessible. The sight of him made Clara realize just how much she had come to trust this man in the short time she'd known him. For the table, he said, handing the flowers to Beatrice, though his eyes lingered on Clara. Dinner was pleasant, with George and Beatrice keeping conversation flowing about town news and local characters. Clara learned that Finn served on the town council and had been instrumental in bringing a schoolteacher to Colorado City the previous year. We're hoping to build a proper schoolhouse by fall, Finn explained. Right now, classes are held in the church. Clara was a teacher back in St. Louis, Beatrice mentioned, before she married Thomas. Is that so? Finn asked, his interest clearly piqued. Clara nodded. Just for a year. I enjoyed it very much. Miss Jenkins is returning east at the end of the term, George commented. Her mother's fallen ill. The town will be looking for a replacement. A meaningful glance passed between the Millers that Clara pretended not to notice. She wasn't ready to think about long-term plans when she was still coming to terms with the loss of everything she'd brought with her. After dinner, Finn suggested a short walk to aid digestion, and Clara found herself accepting despite Beatrice's raised eyebrows. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. How are you really? Finn asked once they were out of earshot of the house. It's a lot to process in one day. Clara appreciated his directness. I'm adjusting, she said carefully. trying to see it as an opportunity rather than a setback. Finn nodded approvingly. That's a rare quality, the ability to face adversity without becoming bitter. I've had practice, Clara replied, thinking of her parents' deaths when she was 16 and then Thomas's slow decline. They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments before Finn spoke again. I'm riding out to the creek crossing again tomorrow. There might be more of your belongings washed up by now. You don't need to do that, Clara protested. You've already been more than kind. I'd like to, Finn insisted. Besides, I need to check the northern pasture anyway. Clara studied his profile in the fading light, wondering at his motives. Was it simply kindness or something more? And why did the question make her pulse quicken? Thank you, she said finally. That's very generous. They had reached the end of the street and turned back toward the miller's home. I'll bring by anything I find, Finn promised as they approached the door. I'd appreciate that. Clara hesitated, then added, I'll be helping in the store if there's anything you need. A smile tugged at the corner of Finn's mouth. I might find myself in need of supplies more often than usual. The simple statement, with all its implications, left Clara momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, the door opened and Beatrice appeared. There you are? I was beginning to worry. Finn stepped back, tipping his hat to both women. Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Miller. It was a pleasure. As he walked away into the gathering darkness, Clara felt a curious mix of emotions, gratitude, certainly, but also something warmer and more complicated that she wasn't quite ready to name. The next few days fell into a routine as Clara adjusted to life in Colorado City. She helped in the store, becoming familiar with the inventory and customers. Many came in specifically to meet her, their curiosity barely disguised behind welcome gifts and friendly questions. True to his word, Finn returned the day after dinner with several more of Clara's belongings he'd recovered from the creek, a small writing desk that had been her grandmother's, surprisingly intact, a box of household linens, though badly stained, and most precious of all, her father's pocket watch that she'd thought lost forever. It was caught in the roots of a tree downstream, Finn explained as he placed the tarnished timepiece in her palm. It might work again if properly cleaned. Clara closed her fingers around the watch, fighting back tears. Thank you. This means more than I can say. Finn's eyes softened as he watched her. I'm glad I could return it to you. He began stopping by the store regularly after that, sometimes with a legitimate need for supplies, other times with transparent excuses that made Clara hide a smile. George and Beatrice exchanged knowing glances but said nothing, allowing the friendship to develop naturally. And it was friendship, Clara insisted to herself, nothing more than the natural bond formed between two people who had shared an intense experience. The fact that she looked forward to his visits, that she found herself smoothing her hair when the bell above the door signaled his arrival, meant nothing. Yet as spring turned to summer, Clara couldn't deny that something was changing between them. Their conversations grew longer and more personal. Finn told her about his dreams for his ranch, about the years of hard work and setbacks that had almost broken him. Clara shared stories of her childhood in Kentucky, of her brief teaching career, and eventually, of her marriage to Thomas, a union based more on practical considerations than passion. He was kind, she explained one evening as they sat on the miller's porch after Sunday dinner, which Finn now attended regularly. We had a comfortable life, but there was always something missing. Finn was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. I think many marriages are like that, he said finally. People settle for companionship when what they really want is connection. The perceptiveness of his comment startled Clara. And what about you? Why haven't you married? Finn's laugh held a note of self-deprecation. I was engaged once, back in Boston. Elizabeth decided she couldn't face life on the frontier after all. Can't say I blame her, it's not an easy life for a woman. Some women might find the challenges worth facing for the right reasons, Clara suggested, her heart beating faster as their eyes met. And what would those reasons be? Finn asked, his voice lower than before. Clara looked away first, suddenly aware of how intimate the conversation had become. Freedom, perhaps. The chance to build something meaningful. Not love. Finn pressed gently. Clara felt the weight of the question all it asked and offered. Love would need to be part of it, she admitted. But not the kind from storybooks. Something steadier. More real. A comfortable silence fell between them as the stars began to appear. Clara was conscious of Finn's presence beside her, the subtle scent of leather and soap, the sound of his breathing, the warmth that seemed to radiate from him even without physical contact. "I should go," he said eventually, standing with reluctance. "Early start tomorrow." As he descended the porch steps, he turned back. "The Independence Day celebration is next weekend. Would you do me the honor of attending with me?" The formal invitation made Clara smile. "I'd like that very much." The week leading up to Independence Day passed in a blur of activity as the entire town prepared for the celebration. Clara helped Beatrice bake pies and cookies for the community picnic while listening to gossip about who would be attending with whom. Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for Finn Calloway over the years, Beatrice confided as they worked. Not one of them managed to hold his interest for more than a few social events. Clara concentrated on rolling out pie dough. "He's a busy man. Running a ranch leaves little time for courting." Beatrice gave her a knowing look. "He seems to find plenty of time to visit our store. And I don't think it's George's conversation he's after." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "We're friends, that's all. He feels responsible for me after the accident." "If you say so, dear," Beatrice replied with poorly concealed amusement. "But I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." The day of the celebration dawned clear and hot. Clara dressed with special care in a new calico dress she'd sewn from fabric purchased with her store wages. It was simpler than the fashions she'd left behind in St. Louis, but somehow it felt more authentic, like the woman she was becoming in this new place. Finn arrived at noon looking uncommonly formal in a clean white shirt and dark vest. His eyes widened appreciably when Clara appeared. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The celebration was held in the meadow outside town, with long tables laden with food, a platform for dancing, and various games and competitions throughout the day. Clara found herself introduced to dozens of people, ranchers and their families, merchants, miners from the hills, and even a few Ute Indians who traded regularly with the town. Finn stayed by her side, his hand occasionally finding the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd. Each casual touch sent a ripple of awareness through her, making Clara increasingly conscious of the shift in their relationship. This was no longer merely friendship, though what exactly it was becoming remained undefined. The highlight of the afternoon was the shooting contest, which Finn entered at the urging of his ranch hands. Clara watched with the other spectators as he took his turn, his concentration absolute as he raised his rifle and fired at the distant targets. 5 shots, 5 bullseyes. The crowd cheered as Finn accepted the blue ribbon with characteristic modesty. "You didn't mention you were the finest shot in the county," Clara teased as he rejoined her. "A man has to maintain some mystery," Finn replied with a rare grin that transformed his serious face. He unpinned the ribbon and offered it to her. "A token for the lady?" Clara accepted it with exaggerated formality, tucking it into her belt. "I shall treasure it always, sir." As evening approached, lanterns were lit around the dance platform, and the local fiddlers took their places. Couples began to gather for the first dance, and Finn turned to Clara with a formal bow. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Lawson?" Clara placed her hand in his, suddenly nervous. "I should warn you, I'm not very practiced." Finn's hand settled at her waist as he drew her into the forming circle. "Just follow my lead. I promise not to let you fall." The music began, and Clara found that following Finn's lead came naturally. He danced as he did everything else with quiet confidence and a grace that belied his size. As they moved through the patterns of the dance, Clara felt herself relax into the rhythm and the security of his guidance. They danced every set, oblivious to the knowing smiles and whispers around them. When the tempo slowed for a waltz, Finn drew her closer, and Clara felt the solid warmth of him against her. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, his strength perfectly complementing her lightness. "People are watching us," Clara murmured, suddenly aware of the attention they were attracting. "Let them," Finn replied, his voice low near her ear. "I don't care what anyone thinks as long as you're comfortable." As darkness fell completely, fireworks began to explode overhead, casting brief, colorful illumination across the gathering. During a pause in the dancing, Finn guided Clara away from the crowd to a quiet spot where they could watch the display. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. More than I've enjoyed anything in a long time, Clara admitted, looking up at the bursts of light against the night sky. Thank you for asking me to come with you. Finn turned toward her, his expression serious in the flickering light. Clara, there's something I need to say. Her heart quickened at his tone. Yes. When I found you at that creek crossing, I was just trying to help a person in trouble, he began, choosing his words carefully. I didn't expect. I never thought. Clara waited, hardly daring to breathe, as he struggled to find the right words. These past months, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your kindness. I find myself thinking about you all the time, Finn confessed. I know it hasn't been long since you lost your husband, and I don't want to presume anything, but I needed you to know how I feel. A particularly bright firework illuminated his face, showing Clara the vulnerability and hope in his expression. In that moment, all her carefully constructed rationalizations fell away. This wasn't merely friendship or gratitude. This was something she had never experienced before, a connection that ran deeper than social compatibility or practical considerations. Finn, she said softly, gathering her courage. I think about you too. More than I should, perhaps. Relief and joy transformed his features. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Finn raised his hand to her cheek. His touch was gentle as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. May I kiss you, Clara? In answer, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender at first, a question rather than a demand, but as Clara's arms slid around his neck, it deepened into something more profound. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I've wanted to do that since I saw you on your porch in that blue dress, Finn admitted, his forehead resting against hers. Clara laughed softly. I've wanted you to since the day you brought me my father's watch. They stood together in the darkness, watching the remainder of the fireworks with new awareness of each other. Clara felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated by the step they had taken. There would be talk. Of course, a widow courting so soon after her husband's death, but in that moment, with Finn's arm around her shoulders, she couldn't bring herself to care. As summer progressed, Clara and Finn's courtship became the subject of good-natured gossip throughout Colorado City. They were seen riding together on Sundays, walking after church, and sitting together at community gatherings. Finn's visits to the general store became so regular that George jokingly suggested he should pay rent for the chair by the counter. For Clara, the weeks passed in a haze of newfound happiness. She had settled into life in Colorado City more completely than she had ever expected, making friends among the other women and finding purpose in her work at the store. She had even begun tutoring several children whose families lived too far from town to attend regular school. In early August, Finn invited her to visit his ranch for the first time. It's not much to look at, he warned as they rode the 5 miles from town. I've been more focused on the cattle than the house. Clara had imagined a crude cabin similar to the line shack where they had sheltered during the storm, so she was surprised when a substantial 2-story house came into view. It was plain but well built, with a wide porch and several outbuildings nearby. A bunkhouse stood a respectful distance away, where his ranch hands lived. This is lovely, Finn, she said honestly as he helped her dismount. It needs a woman's touch, he replied, watching her reaction closely. I built it bigger than I needed, thinking someday. He didn't finish the thought, but Clara understood the implication. This house had been built with a family in mind, a future Finn had planned for even when there was no specific woman to share it with. The interior was sparse but clean, with sturdy furniture and practical arrangements. The kitchen was larger than Clara expected, with a good stove and ample workspace. Upstairs, several bedrooms stood empty except for one that Finn used, which contained a large bed, a chest of drawers, and a small bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes. You read a lot, Clara observed, scanning the titles that ranged from practical ranching manuals to Shakespeare and Dickens. Winter evenings are long, Finn explained, and I've always believed education doesn't end with schooling. Clara ran her hand along the spines of the books, feeling a deeper connection to this man who valued knowledge as she did. I lost most of my books in the creek, she said wistfully. You're welcome to borrow any of these, Finn offered. Or all of them. The way he said it, as if sharing his books was the most natural thing in the world, touched Clara deeply. It wasn't just the offer itself, but what it represented. the sharing of his private self, his thoughts, his inner world. They ate lunch on the porch, looking out over the rolling pastures where Finn's cattle grazed. He pointed out features of the ranch and shared his plans for expansion, including a new barn he hoped to build before winter. "You've created something remarkable here," Clara said, impressed by how much he had accomplished alone. "It's still a work in progress," Finn replied, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "Like most worthwhile things." After lunch, he showed her the small orchard he had planted the previous year, apple and cherry trees that had survived their first winter and now stood promising future harvests. "The trees need at least 3 years before they'll bear fruit," he explained. "But I believe in planning for the long term." Clara was touched by this evidence of Finn's patience and foresight, his willingness to invest in something that wouldn't show immediate returns. It spoke to the kind of man he was, one who built slowly but durably. As they walked back toward the house, Finn suddenly stopped and turned to her. "Clara, I've been wanting to ask you something." The seriousness of his tone made her heart skip. "Yes." Finn took her hands in his blue eyes intent on hers. "I know we haven't known each other long in the usual way of counting time, but I feel like I've known you all my life. These past months have been the happiest I can remember." Clara squeezed his hands encouragingly, too moved to speak. "I'm not a wealthy man by Eastern standards," Finn continued, "but this ranch is prospering, and I can provide a good life. What I'm trying to say, not very eloquently, is that I love you, Clara. I love your strength and your kindness and your determination. I love the way you've embraced this new life despite all the setbacks. And if you could see your way clear to considering a future with me, I'd be the happiest man in Colorado territory." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "Are you asking me to marry you, Finn Calloway?" A smile spread across his face. "I believe I am, though I seem to be making a hash of it." Clara laughed through her tears, feeling a certainty she had never experienced before. "Then my answer is yes. Yes, I will marry you." Finn's expression transformed with joy as he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I promise to do everything in my power to make you happy, Clara." "You already do," she whispered, knowing it was absolutely true. They rode back to town in the golden light of late afternoon, making plans for their future. Finn suggested a September wedding, giving them time to prepare, but not so long that they would have to endure an extended engagement. "Unless you'd prefer to wait until spring," he added, concerned she might feel rushed. Clara shook her head. "September sounds perfect. I don't want to wait any longer than necessary." The announcement of their engagement was met with delight by the Millers and congratulations from the townspeople, many of whom had been expecting it. Beatrice immediately threw herself into wedding preparations, insisting that Clara should have a proper celebration despite the frontier setting. "You'll need a special dress, of course," she declared, "and we must order a cake from Denver." Clara protested the expense, but Beatrice was adamant. "You're the only family I have out here, and I intend to see you properly married." As the wedding date approached, Clara divided her time between working in the store and preparing for her new life as a rancher's wife. She sewed curtains and linens for the house, learned to make Finn's favorite dishes from his housekeeper, and spent every available moment with her future husband. Their courtship had an intensity born of mature certainty rather than youthful infatuation. They discussed practical matters like finances and household management, but also shared dreams and fears, building a foundation of understanding and trust that Clara had never experienced in her first marriage. "I want children," Finn told her one evening as they sat on the Miller's porch. "If you're willing. I've always imagined a house full of family." Clara smiled, picturing little boys with Finn's blue eyes running across the ranch. "I'd like that too. Very much." 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck the territory. Heavy rains, unseasonal and relentless, caused flooding throughout the region. The same creek that had nearly taken Clara's life in the spring once again became a raging torrent, cutting off access between the town and outlying ranches, including Finn's. For 3 days, Clara paced anxiously, watching the rain and worrying about Finn and his men. Reports reached town of cattle swept away, crops destroyed, and homesteads damaged. When the rain finally stopped, the damage assessment began, and Clara waited with growing dread for news of the Circle C ranch. On the fourth day, as the waters began to recede, Finn rode into town, mud-splattered and exhausted but unharmed. Clara ran to meet him as he dismounted outside the general store, throwing herself into his arms regardless of who might be watching. "Thank God you're safe," she breathed, holding him tightly. "I've been so worried." Finn's arms encircled her, his face buried in her hair. "It was touch and go for a while," he admitted. "We lost some cattle, and the south pasture is underwater, but the house and barn are intact." They went inside where Finn accepted a hot cup of coffee from Beatrice and explained the situation to the gathered townsfolk. The flooding had been worst along the creek beds, with several smaller ranches suffering significant damage. The community would need to pull together to help those most affected. "What about the wedding?" Clara asked later when they had a moment alone. "Should we postpone?" Finn shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. After seeing how quickly things can be destroyed, I'm more certain than ever that we shouldn't waste a day we could be together." His response confirmed what Clara already knew, that she had found a partner who understood what truly mattered, who wouldn't allow obstacles to derail their happiness. The wedding took place as planned on a perfect September day, with the entire community turning out to celebrate. The church was decorated with late summer wildflowers, and Clara wore a cream-colored dress that Beatrice had secretly ordered from Denver. As she walked down the aisle on George's arm, her eyes locked with Finn's, and the love she saw there banished any lingering doubts. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with vows that both had carefully considered. When Finn slipped a gold band onto her finger, another surprise he had arranged through a jeweler in Denver, Clara felt a sense of rightness that transcended the occasion itself. This was not just a wedding. It was the beginning of the life she was meant to live. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with food and dancing and enough good wishes to last a lifetime. As the sun began to set, Finn and Clara slipped away to begin the journey to their ranch, their home. "Mrs. Calloway," Finn said as he helped her into the buggy he'd brought for the occasion. "How does it sound?" Clara savored the name, testing it in her mind. "Like a new chapter in a very good book." Finn smiled as he took the reins. The best chapters are yet to come. Their wedding night was a revelation for Clara. Where her first marriage had involved dutiful submission to infrequent marital relations, with Finn she discovered passion and reciprocity she hadn't known was possible. His tenderness and patience awakened something within her that responded with equal fervor, creating a physical bond as powerful as their emotional connection. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight filtered through the curtainless windows of their bedroom, Clara felt a sense of completeness that brought tears to her eyes. "What is it?" Finn asked, concerned as he brushed away a tear with his thumb. "I'm just happy," she whispered. "I never knew it could be like this." Finn kissed her gently. "This is only the beginning." The first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Clara learned the rhythms of ranch life, the pre-dawn rising, the seasonal work with cattle, the isolation during winter months when snow made travel to town difficult. But she also discovered unexpected pleasures, the satisfaction of a well-managed household, the beauty of starlit nights unobscured by city lights, and the deep companionship that grew between her and Finn with each passing day. By spring, Clara had transformed the house with feminine touches, curtains at the windows, colorful quilts on the beds, and a vegetable garden that promised fresh produce through the summer. She had also won the respect of Finn's ranch hands, who initially viewed her with skepticism but came to appreciate her cooking, her willingness to help during busy times, and the positive effect she had on their boss. "Never seen the boss smile so much," Clara overheard one of them comment. "That woman's better than a sunny day after a week of rain." The comment warmed her, confirming that she had found her place in this new world. And when, as summer approached, she confirmed her suspicion that she was expecting their first child, Clara felt that her happiness was complete. She told Finn one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a habit they had established early in their marriage. His reaction, pure joy followed by tender concern, only deepened her love for him. "Are you feeling well? Do you need anything? Should we ride to town to see the doctor?" The questions tumbled out as he knelt before her chair, his hands gently cradling her still flat stomach. Clara laughed, covering his hands with hers. I'm perfectly fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, you know. Finn looked up at her with such love that Clara felt her heart might burst. Not my wife. Not our baby. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall, with Clara maintaining her usual activities as long as possible. Finn became increasingly protective, insisting on hiring a woman from town to help with household chores as Clara's time approached. I'm not an invalid, she protested when he forbade her from carrying a bucket of water from the well. Humor me, Finn replied, taking the bucket from her hands. Let me take care of you both. His tenderness was impossible to resist, and Clara found herself accepting his attention with growing appreciation as the baby grew and her energy waned. Winter settled over the ranch earlier than usual that year, with the first heavy snow falling in November. Clara's due date was still 3 weeks away when the storm began, but something told her the baby might not wait for the calendar. The baby's dropped, she told Finn as they prepared for bed one night, the wind howling outside their snug bedroom. It could be any day now. Finn's expression was a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Should I ride for the midwife tomorrow? Clara considered the snow-covered landscape and the distance to town. Let's wait another day or two. Mrs. Parker said first babies often take their time, but nature had other plans. Clara woke in the pre-dawn hours to a sharp pain and a rush of fluid. Finn, she whispered, shaking her husband's shoulder. It's time. Finn was instantly alert, springing from bed to light the lamp. Now? Are you sure? Another contraction answered his question, making Clara gasp. Finn helped her change into a dry nightgown and settled her back in bed before pulling on his clothes. I'm going for Mrs. Parker, he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Pete will stay with you while I'm gone. Clara nodded, knowing there was no alternative. The baby was coming, and they needed the midwife's expertise. Be careful. The trail will be treacherous. Finn kissed her forehead. I'll be back before you know it. Just hold on. He roused Pete, one of his most trusted hands, explaining the situation and instructing him to stay in the house with Clara until his return. Then he was gone, riding into the dark, snowy morning on his strongest horse. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and waiting for Clara. Pete proved surprisingly helpful, keeping the fire built up, bringing her water, and even holding her hand during the worst contractions. By midday, Clara knew the baby wouldn't wait much longer. Pete, she called during a brief respite between pains. I need you to boil water and find clean linens. This baby is coming with or without Mrs. Parker. The young cowboy's face paled, but he nodded resolutely. Yes, madam. I'll do what needs doing. As the afternoon waned and the contractions intensified, Clara began to worry about Finn. The journey to town and back should have taken 6 hours at most, even in the snow. Something must have delayed him. She was fighting the urge to push when they finally heard hooves in the yard. Pete rushed to the door, returning with not only Finn and Mrs. Parker, but also the town doctor, all of them snow-covered and exhausted. Clara, Finn was at her side in an instant, his cold hand grasping hers. I'm so sorry it took so long. The creek was frozen, but not solid enough to cross. We had to find another way. You're here now, Clara managed between breaths. That's all that matters. Mrs. Parker took charge immediately, examining Clara and confirming what she already knew: the baby was coming now. Dr. Mitchell prepared his instruments while Finn was instructed to support Clara from behind. When the next pain comes, you push with all your might, Mrs. Parker directed, positioning herself at the foot of the bed. Clara nodded, gathering her strength. With Finn's strong presence behind her, his arms supporting her, she felt a new determination. 3 more contractions, 3 mighty pushes, and suddenly the room was filled with the indignant cry of their firstborn. A boy, Mrs. Parker announced, quickly wrapping the infant in a warmed blanket. A fine, healthy son. She placed the squalling bundle in Clara's arms, and all the pain of the preceding hours vanished as Clara looked into her son's tiny, perfect face. He's beautiful, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Finn leaned over her shoulder, his own eyes wet as he gently touched his son's head. He's a miracle, he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. Just like his mother. They named him William Frederick Calloway, after both their fathers, but called him Will from the start. He had Finn's blue eyes and Clara's auburn hair, a combination that charmed everyone who saw him. The winter passed peacefully as the new family adjusted to their changed dynamic. Finn proved to be a devoted father, as willing to change a diaper or walk a fussy baby as he was to manage his ranch. Clara watched their son grow with a joy that exceeded anything she had expected from motherhood. As spring transformed the landscape, bringing new life to the ranch, Clara found moments to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. The loss of her wagon in the creek crossing what had seemed like disaster at the time had led directly to her meeting Finn. Every hardship had ultimately guided her toward this life that now felt so perfectly right. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Finn surprised her with a small wooden chest he had crafted himself. "For your treasures," he explained as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "The ones you lost and the new ones you'll collect." Inside, he had placed her recovered possessions, her mother's quilt, her father's watch, the few books that had survived the flood alongside new mementos of their life together. Will's first baby shoe, a pressed flower from their wedding, a sketch of their ranch that a traveling artist had made the previous summer. "I thought we might bury it someday," Finn said, "for future generations to find, so they'll know something of their history." The thought of future generations, children and grandchildren continuing what they had begun filled Clara with profound contentment. That evening, as they sat on their porch with Will sleeping in Clara's arms, she looked out over the land that had become her home and felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. "Do you ever think about that day at the creek?" she asked Finn, who sat beside her whittling a small wooden horse for Will. "How different our lives might have been if you hadn't come along when you did." Finn set down his knife, considering. "I believe some things are meant to be," he said finally. "I'd have found you somehow, even if it hadn't been that day." Clara smiled at his certainty. "That's a nice thought." "It's more than a thought," Finn replied, his hand finding hers. "Some connections exist before we meet. I felt at the moment I saw you in that wagon like I'd been looking for you without knowing it." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Clara leaned against her husband's shoulder, their son nestled between them. The ranch sprawled before them, cattle dotting the distant pastures, the barn and outbuildings solid against the landscape. This was the life she had never known she wanted, the love she had never thought to find. "You'll reach dry land with me," Finn had promised that stormy day, and he had kept that promise in ways neither of them could have imagined, bringing her not just to physical safety, but to an emotional haven she had never known existed. "I love you," Clara said simply, the words carrying all the gratitude and wonder she felt. Finn's arm tightened around her shoulders. "And I love you. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after." As darkness settled over the land, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the sky, Clara felt the truth of his words like a physical presence as real as the child in her arms or the man at her side. This was their story, still being written with each passing day, and it was more beautiful than anything she could have crafted for herself. In the years that followed, the Circle C Ranch prospered and grew, as did the Calloway family. Will was joined by a sister, Eliza, 2 years later, and then by twins, James and John, the year after that. The house that had once seemed too large for Finn alone now rang with children's laughter and the busy sounds of family life. Colorado City grew as well, with the arrival of the railroad bringing new settlers and opportunities. Finn expanded his holdings, adding adjacent properties as they became available and diversifying into sheep as well as cattle. Clara continued to teach, establishing a small school on the ranch for their children and those of neighboring families too distant from town for regular attendance. Their life was not without hardships: drought years that threatened the herds, a fire that destroyed the barn and had to be rebuilt, childhood illnesses that kept Clara awake for nights on end. But through it all, the foundation they had built remained solid. Their partnership, begun that stormy day at the creek crossing, only strengthened with each challenge they faced together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Finn surprised Clara with a journey, a real honeymoon to San Francisco, something they had never had time for when first married. They left the children with Beatrice and George, who doted on their niece and nephews, and traveled by train across the spectacular western landscape. San Francisco dazzled Clara with its sophistication and energy, so different from their quiet ranch life. They attended the theater, dined in fine restaurants, and walked hand in hand along the bay, savoring the rare opportunity to be simply husband and wife rather than parents and ranch owners. On their last night in the city, standing on the balcony of their hotel room overlooking the glittering lights below, Finn pulled Clara into his arms. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Choosing this life with me instead of staying in the city?" Clara looked up at him, surprised by the question after all these years. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. Not for a single moment. And it was true. The life they had built together, with its joys and struggles, its routine and its unexpected moments, was exactly where she was meant to be. That flood-swollen creek had not just altered her journey. It had guided her to her true destination. When they returned home, the children racing out to meet them with excited stories of their time with the Millers, Clara felt the rightness of their world settle around her again. This was the legacy they were creating, not just a prosperous ranch, but a family bound by love and shared purpose. As summer faded into fall, and Will prepared for his first term at a proper school in town, Clara found herself reflecting on the swift passage of time. The boy who had once fit in the crook of her arm now stood nearly to her shoulder, with his father's thoughtful nature and her own love of books. "He'll do well," Finn assured her as they watched Will ride off with the neighbor's son for his first day. "We've given him strong roots." Clara nodded, leaning into the comfort of her husband's embrace. "And wings to fly when he's ready." That evening, after the younger children were asleep, Clara and Finn sat on their porch as they had done nearly every night of their marriage. The ritual had not lost its meaning over the years, this quiet time to connect, to share the day's events, to simply be together under the vast Colorado sky. "I've been thinking," Finn said, his voice thoughtful in the gathering dusk, "about the day we met." Clara smiled, knowing exactly which anniversary approached. "The creek crossing." Finn nodded, his hand finding hers in the familiar gesture that never failed to comfort. "I told you then that you'd reach dry land with me. But the truth is, Clara, you're the one who brought me to shore. I was just existing before you came into my life, working, building, but not really living. You changed everything." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected declaration. After a decade of marriage, Finn could still surprise her with the depth of his feeling. "We saved each other," she said softly. As the first stars appeared overhead, Clara thought about the long journey from that rain-swollen creek to this moment, the unexpected turns, the challenges overcome, the joy discovered. Not the life she had planned, but infinitely better than anything she could have imagined for herself. The night deepened around them, the familiar sounds of their ranch horses in the corral, the distant lowing of cattle, the gentle creak of the porch swing creating a symphony of home. Clara rested her head on Finn's shoulder, content in the knowledge that their story, begun in crisis, had transformed into something enduring and beautiful. "I love you," Finn murmured, the words as heartfelt now as the first time he had spoken them. "And I love you," Clara replied, the simple truth that had shaped their life together. Above them, the stars of the Colorado night sky glittered like promises kept, like dreams fulfilled, like love made visible in the darkness. And in that moment, Clara knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, however difficult their beginnings, lead exactly where they are meant to go.